Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 9th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Cory Doctorow, author of Chokepoint Capitalism, how big tech and big content captured the creative labor markets and how we'll win them back, co-written with Rebecca Giblin. Also on the program today, Republicans finally choose a Speaker of the House. Now they're jammed up on their rules vote. Meanwhile, Brazil's Congress attacked by Bolsonaro supporters in a January 6th style attempted coup. Joaquin Castro calls for that same Bolsonaro to be extradited to Brazil. You'll recall he's been hanging out in supermarkets in Florida, making sure he was on videotape in all those times for some odd reason. That was weird. Meanwhile, Joe Biden meets with Trudeau and Obrador in the wake of new administration rules essentially attacking the rights of asylum seekers if they're coming from Central America. Over 7,000 New York City nurses are on strike at this very moment. And the Fifth Circuit of Federal Appeals Court, that's the loony bin from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, strikes down the bump stock ban. Those are devices that essentially make semi-automatic guns more or less automatic guns. Lastly, Biden's EPA looks to tighten rule on fine particulate matter that corporations can dump in our air. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is the second week of the new year, 2023. Did I say 2022 or 2023?
Oh, well, if you said 2022, I didn't catch it.
If I get through this transition into the new year without saying 2022, I'm going to be bowled over. That is called being a real pro.
Setting yourself some goals.
Yeah, exactly. That's my resolution. I'm keeping it within grasp. Emma is out. She'll be back Wednesday, supposedly. I mean, at this point, who could tell? We will get to Cory Doctorow shortly, folks. But first, and also, we're obviously going to be talking about what took place in Brazil. There was, just oddly similar to what was going on January 6th. And I would imagine also, actually, some similar people playing a role in instigating this notion that somehow the election was fraudulent and whatnot. This seems to be, the playbook these days.
Yeah. International.
It's gone. And I think Steve Bannon was heavily involved in crap stirring down there, if you will, among other things, obviously, not just Bannon. So Friday night, the Republicans were essentially voting until the wee hours of the morning. I think it was around midnight or so when they finally got they were going into where they had just lost the 14th round of voting. This is Kevin McCarthy. and getting prepared for the 15th round. And there was essentially a little brawl. Now, this is the C-SPAN cameras are allowed to wander during very few instances when Congress meets. One of those instances is in the choosing of a House Speaker. We've never seen much footage from that because it's usually one or two votes and it's all over. There's very little drama, but the C-SPAN cameras, there's 3 of them, have been capturing all sorts of things, ranging from AOC, talking with Gates and Good to this little squabble. And just to narrate it, what's going on here is there's some conversation between Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz. And it involves, I think, Matt Gaetz wanting to be on, what committee was it that Rogers controls?
He wanted an armed services subcommittee, Gavel, and Rogers is the incoming chair.
Rogers is the chair of the committee. And part of the way that, committee chairs and congresspeople exercise their patronage is also on these subcommittee chairs and subcommittee positions. And there's a lot of things are very transactional there. And apparently Gates didn't care what the chair, Rogers, wanted to do. He was telling McCarthy what he wanted. And Rogers, as you can see, ultimately didn't take too kindly to that. Oh, he's not going to talk to him. Yeah, Matt Gaetz is looking very, very... Now, Mike Rogers is not even in frame here, so he doesn't know what's going on right here.
Getting a little bit more animated
Yeah,
now.
and he's like, go down there and tell that dude over there that, and that's where I'm going to take it. A lot of finger pointing going on there. And you can see there was somebody right there who had to be sort of escorted out a little bit because he was getting too heated. And they're getting annoyed at Gates.
Here we go.
And here comes Rogers. He hears what's going on here.
And
Somebody told him. Whoa, look at that. The guy's going to grab him by the face. That's poor camera work. They didn't follow the right thing that was going on there. But look, the bottom line here is there are, and we don't know all the concessions at this point. We have a pretty good sense of it. And it involves certain members of the Freedom Caucus being placed on specific committees. There are, the last I heard, there was also a vote that was going to be held on term limits for members of Congress. There are, and we'll find out in the final analysis about the rules that get promulgated. One of them was essentially one person who could make a motion to vacate the chair. I mean, there's really not the same amount of power in there, except for it can slow the roll of the agenda of the leading party. I guess theoretically, the difference between 1 and 5, let's put it this way, seems negligible because you're going to need 5 who are going to vote against them anyways if you're going to get rid of them as speaker. 1 puts it into play and just creates all sorts of headaches for people. But we're not going to know the implications of these changes for, maybe even a year, because there's a lot of people who are upset, and there's a lot of so-called moderates really just different right wingers who are on a different team who are going to be pissed because they've lost their committee seats. And so it remains to be seen. We know in 2018, the Progressive Caucus exercised some of their influence in trying to get committee chairs. And then by 2020, they ended up losing some because of stuff that went down. So how this power is exercised is a complicated thing. And, you know, McCarthy starts off as a weak guy in the first place. He's a lot weak. I mean, he has no popular support. There's nobody who's going to pay a price in the Republican Party for bucking Kevin McCarthy because, for large part, even Republicans don't particularly like him. So we'll see. But if you had any doubt as to who was the titular leader of this Republican Party, make no mistake about it. It's not Matt Gaetz. It's not Lauren Boebert. It's not Kevin McCarthy. It is this guy that Kevin McCarthy praises. It's number 2.
I want to especially thank President Trump. I don't think anybody should doubt his influence. He was with me from the beginning. Somebody wrote the doubt of whether he was there, and he was all in. He would call me, and he would call others. And he really was, I was just talking to him tonight, helping get those final votes. What he's really saying, really for the party and the country, that we have to come together. We have to focus on the economy. We've got to focus, make our borders secure. We've got to do so much work to do, and he was a great influence to make that all happen. So thank you, President Trump.
Yeah, there you go. So if you had any questions.
Was it the 13th vote where the phone was passed with DT
where,
on
yes,
it?
Marjorie Taylor Greene had yeah. I mean, this is... you know, again, at the end of the day, there's no legislation that these people are looking to pass anyways. The one thing is going to be the debt ceiling. That's where it's going to be. They're going to kamikaze in many respects, and we'll see what happens with that. We're going to have to talk about the platinum coin again soon. But we're going to be talking to Cory Doctorow in just a few, hopefully. In the meantime, a couple of words from our sponsors. Well, it's really a word from me about our sponsors. I've talked about the vitamin regimen I'm on. It's really not that regimented. I take some every day. And what finally got me doing that was not so much any type of change in my mindset. It was just like the ease in which it was, and also knowing that I had high quality vitamins from Ritual. Well, now they have a probiotic that contains clinically studied strains. Ritual's Symbiotic Plus contains 2 of the world's most studied strains with over 350 publications of human clinical trials. What makes the components so clearly Ritual? Well, they are science-backed. They are research stacked, especially when stacked up against leading direct-to-consumer and top-selling probiotics on the market. You keep reading more about gut health and how important that is to a whole host of things. Well, the Symbiotic Plus is a 3-in-1 with clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support balanced gut microbiome. It's just one daily release capsule. It's simple. It is streamlined gut support. It is designed to help reach the colon, not the stomach, which is the ideal place for probiotics to survive and grow. I don't know how they do that. I don't know how that technology works, but maybe I don't know how it works. But the upside of this, no refrigeration needed. It's designed with moisture-controlled bottle technology to protect probiotic strains. You know, like I say, I've been hearing a lot about probiotics for a while. My kids have been taking them. I decided to do it, and Ritual is just frankly, it's a brand I trust. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. There's no more shame in your gut game. That's why Ritual is offering my listeners 10% off during your first 3 months. Visit ritual.com/majority to start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. Check it out. They'll send it to you on a monthly basis. And when you run out, you'll never run out. That's the point. That's what happens to me. Every time I start any type of regime like that, it works until I run out of the first bottle and then I forget to do it. Another word from our sponsor today. I was always intimidated by the idea of a VPN. Well, as you know, incognito mode does not hide your activity. Doesn't matter how many times you clean your cache. Is it cache or cache? Your internet service provider can still see every single website you've ever visited and then legally sell your information to ad companies. That's just one of the reasons why you need ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so their ISP can't see the sites you visit. ExpressVPN keeps all of your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data with the most powerful encryption possible. ExpressVPN runs seamlessly in the background. It's super easy to use. All you got to do, regardless of what your device is, your iPad, your computer, your phone, one button, and you're protected. It's even available for your smart TV. It is so easy that there is no excuse not to use it. And then once you do it, you're not even thinking about it. Sounds a lot more intimidating than it was. And of course, it also opens up a bunch of your what you can stream, incidentally, on your computer from foreign places.
I mean, if you're a NBA League Pass fan like myself that can't get, say, Knicks or Nets game because of local blackouts, you might use a VPN.
I've heard talk of like having trouble seeing the Patriots because you live in the New York area with your YouTube TV, but I'm not going to get into that. You can protect your online activity today with the VPN rated #1 by Business Insider. Visit my exclusive link, expressvpn.com/majority. You can get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. So do the math, 15 months for the price of 12. That's expressvpn.com/majority. expressvpn.com/majority. Check it out. And lastly, final sponsor of the day is Blinkist. Blinkist is great. I've been using their, I guess, well, they call them blinks, but they're like Cliff Notes a little bit. But also, they also have it in audio form. They have a huge library of nonfiction books. And it essentially allows you to get all the key takeaways from some of these nonfiction books and either in written form or audio form, and large range. They got like Adam Tooze, who is that economist we had on. Well, we had him on a while back. I don't think it's.
Sometimes we had him for the COVID book that he did.
Yes,
and the Deluge. I think we had him for another book too. I think.
Yes, and they've got books like his on there where you get the key takeaways from those books, but they also have like things like, I don't know, like the 4-Hour Work Week and that type of like how-to books. But also that Michael Pollan book, like This Is Your Mind on Plants. Is that what it was? That's what I listened on there about psychedelics and whatnot. Like I'm interested in reading a Michael Pollan book, but I don't necessarily have the time for it. But I'm interested in what his key takeaways are. And then frankly, there's been sometimes I've read books just based upon what I heard. And now they also have something called Blinkist Connect, which essentially is like a two for the price of one on the premium side. So right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/majority report. You start your 7-day free trial. You'll get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled BILNKIST, Blinkist. Blinkist.com/majority report. You get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/majority report. And now for a limited time, you can even use Blinkist Connect to share your premium account. You will get 2 premium subscriptions for the price of 1. So if Matt and I want to get into like a little book club or a listening club, or you want with your partner or your kid, there it is. Check it out. We will put our links in the podcast and YouTube description and on the website. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member today at jointhemajorityreport.com. All right, quick break. Hopefully we'll have Cory Doctorow in just a moment. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining us by phone, Cory Doctorow, author of his latest Chokepoint Capitalism, which he co-wrote with Rebecca Giblin, how big tech and big content captured creative labor markets and how we'll win them back. Cory, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. It's lovely to be chatting with you again. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too. All right, let's just start with this. Let me just start with this is, I want to go through the various, I guess, sort of like examples that you guys used in the first half of the book of to describe what chokepoint capitalism is. But I just, the Prince thing, I lived through this. It never, it was sort of always in the background. Like he changed his name. I just assumed, he just did that because he's trying to be wacky. But that wasn't it at all. We're talking, of course, about the musician. Let's just start there, just because I was like, I was like, oh my God, why didn't I ever even contemplate why he done this? But walk us through like why Prince changed his name as an example of what is now, I think, much more even widespread than it was then.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and do this without getting into too much eye-watering detail. The book that we wrote, Chokepoint Capitalism, we kind of spend the first half unpicking these very Baroque scams, where kind of John Oliver style dissection of these different kinds of accounting frauds. And the record industry is rife with them. It's the point of going through all of these is to realize that they're not hard to understand because they're complicated. They're complicated precisely so that they'll be hard to understand. So the record industry has long been a source of very bad contracting terms for artists. And part of our thesis in the book is that it doesn't really matter how much copyright you give to artists if there's only a couple of labels and if they demand that you just turn over all that copyright to sign to them. And Prince is a very good example of that. So just as with most other artists, Prince had to sign away all of his rights to sign up with the label. And he had to finance the production of his own music. When you sign a deal with the label, you get an advance that's supposed to pay for your rent, your groceries while you're recording. And then you also have charged to your account all the expenses associated with that recording. So they tell you what studio to use and what engineers and what sidemen, and they charge you for all of that, often at rates that they get to determine and often rates that are much higher than market rate. And then you start earning it back. And you earn it back in the form of royalties, and the royalties are extraordinarily low. They were better for Prince than they were for, say, the Beatles, who got 1 penny per LP that they split 4 ways, minus 15% for breakage and 10% for their manager. But they were still extremely low. And what that meant is that Prince could make millions and millions of dollars for the labels and still owe hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions for his production. What's more, Prince had recorded a lot more music than the labels would allow him to put out. And so he couldn't even earn back the money that he had paid in, and they had a law on his masters. And so he painted
I just want to tease that part out here so that people understand what that means. So he's going into the studio, he's pumping out, he's written a bunch of songs, he's pumping them out, they're recording them. The studio doesn't want to use them on the album, but they're still charging him for producing them. So they're not allowing him, A, the ability to make money off of those things that he's paid for, and B, from an artistic standpoint, he wants to release, he can't release them. And so it's just having gone down there and done that extra work essentially cost him money, and he didn't even get the artistic, he didn't even get any artistic value out of it.
Yeah, so the labels, back in those days before we had streaming digital music, the labels really wanted to control how much music there was. There were these physical limitations to how much music you could sell that were in the form of record bins and CD bins at the record store and the space they had at the warehouse. And they just wanted to time the tempo of releases so that they could manage and maximize their return from all of this stuff. And Prince was an extraordinarily prolific guy, a brilliant and talented musician. And, he wanted to release more than he had. Now, it's interesting because when digital came along, not only did it free us from some of that tyranny of physical space, but more importantly, provided a competitive hedge against the labels. That when digital came along, the labels started paying more royalties. They started cleaning up their worst accounting practices. Some of that was actually due to some legal changes. So after the Enron meltdown, we got Sarbanes-Oxley. And Sarbanes-Oxley established criminal penalties for corporate executives who signed fraudulent accounting forms. And so before that, it had been a common practice to run an off-the-books third shift at the CD pressing plants, where they would press another round of CDs that would just never show up in your royalty statements, and they could sell those without giving you any of that money. And after Sarbanes-Oxley created criminal liability, personal criminal liability, jail time for executives who signed off on those statements, that practice ended. But, as the tech sector became much more consolidated and started to look a lot more like the record industry, the two became really indistinguishable. It's like that last scene from Animal House where you look from the pig, or not Animal House, Animal Farm, where you look from the pigs to the men and the men to the pigs, and you can't tell the difference. And that, really reaches its apotheosis with Spotify, which is a tech company that's owned in significant measure by the record labels. And so it's the fusion of tech and entertainment. And they use all the tricks that tech has and all the tricks that entertainment has to screw over the creative workforce that produces the value for them.
Has it gotten worse? I mean, because, having had been in show business at one time and aware, particularly in the context of like movies, it was much harder for them to do this with TV. But for some reason, it was much easier for them to do it in movies because there was a lot more sort of like places they could spend money on marketing. But it always feels like you get residuals or any type of like back end on any of these things. By the time they're done accounting, no movie seems to have ever made a profit.
Well, in some ways, this is just like a reflection of a phenomenon that's happening all over the world. So every sector has become super concentrated. There's 2 companies that make all the athletic shoes and 3 companies that do all the shipping, and all your beer comes from 2 companies, and, 1 company makes all the eyeglasses in the world. So this is true also in the entertainment sector. And wherever you see these monopolies, you also get what economists call monopsony. It's difficult word, but an easy concept. A monopoly is when you've got one seller for a good, and a monopsony is when you've got one buyer. Monopsonies are particularly bad for labor because you are selling your labor. And so if there's only one buyer for your labor, then that buyer can set terms. And in the entertainment industry, there are so many choke points that these monopsonies have created that wherever you turn, there's someone sticking their hands in your pockets. So we tell a story in our book about the Writers Guild here in California, in Hollywood, that ground out a 22-month strike against the talent agencies. All the talent agencies have been rolled up into 4 giant firms, 2 of them owned by private equity companies. And they restructured the standard deal so that instead of taking 10% of what the writer got from their negotiated contract, they started to take a packaging fee from the studios. So they said, we're not going to take a commission out of the writer. We're going to package the writer, the actor, and the director all together for a single project, and we will get a fee out of the studio. And the less money they accepted for the talent, the bigger that fee would be. And in the golden age of television, when you had all this like high budget Netflix and other streaming TV coming out, the income for writers shrank to the point where some writers discovered that their agents were getting 90% and they were getting 10%. And the agencies were starting to set up their own studios. So they were going to negotiate with themselves on behalf of their writers. The writers gave the agencies 7 days to clean up their act, to sign a code of conduct. And the agencies, all 4 of them, refused. And then on one day, all 7,000 writers in the Writers Guild fired their agents and grounded a 22-month strike that culminated with the absolute capitulation of all 4 of the big talent agencies. And, that story appears in the second half of the book, where we address ourselves to solutions to this problem. And it's not the kind of individual solutions that you get in those chapter 11 books. It's like 10 chapters of how things are screwed up, and 11th chapter about how you can vote harder.
Right.
It's detailed, technical, systemic proposals. Labor unions, changes in contracting law, changes in competition law, changes in our tech law that will make sure that the distributional outcomes of entertainment labor markets result in creators getting more money for their labor. Not just more copyright, but more money to pay their rent, more money to pay for their groceries, more money to put braces on their kids' teeth.
I want to go through some of those solutions, and also, talk about why it's important for the sector, and also, how this model is not just does not just simply exist within the sort of more creative fields. But let's talk about. I mean, I think people understand the dynamic that goes on with Amazon. But let's just briefly go over like what they did with books. But the Audible stuff is even more, I think, sort of is even more intense, more concentrated. Well, I guess literally concentrated, but also as a story of this dynamic.
Yeah, sure. So Audible, you may know, it's Amazon's audiobook division. They control about 90% of the audiobook market in the major genres. And they have an ironclad policy that if you want to distribute your book on Audible, you have to allow Amazon to wrap that book in a proprietary encryption scheme, a digital rights management scheme. And under a Clinton-era tech law, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, under Section 1201 of that act, it's a felony to give someone a tool to remove DRM. So what that means is that if you buy my book on Audible, and then someone offers me more money if I start selling my books there, I can't give you a tool to follow me there. I can't give you a tool to convert your Audible books to just MP3s or to play on some other service. Only Audible can authorize that, not the copyright holder. And so as Audible has been able to lock in more and more of its suppliers, right, as it's been able to use its monopsony power, it's been able to turn the dial so that we creators get less money for our products and Amazon gets more money. And one way that it does this is by locking in its customers through a subscription scheme. If you get a subscription scheme to Audible, you get a credit every month that you can trade for an audiobook. And if you have that subscription, at least until recently, you could return that audiobook at any time for no questions asked, even months after the fact, even if you had listened to it several times over, and you would get your credit back. And Amazon would encourage you to do it. After you listen to the audiobook, they bombard you with emails and pop-ups and messages on their website saying, hey, if you didn't like that audiobook, you know you can just get your credit back and get another audiobook, which makes the subscription more valuable. It effectively allows their most avid customers to treat Audible as a library and check out as many audiobooks as they want with a one-credit subscription, which would be fine if Audible was paying the bills. But every time you returned a book, Audible clawed back the royalty from the creator. And they especially did this to creators who used ACX, which is their self-serve platform for independent creators, creators who had to sign away the right to produce to put their audiobook on any other service for 7 years. It was an exclusive deal, and who had the least negotiating leverage over Amazon because they were just individuals or small publishers. And they were not told how these royalties were being calculated. What they would see is that they had only sold, say, 10 copies. And what they wouldn't know is that they'd sold 25 copies. And Amazon had inveigled its customers to return 15 of them and had taken back that money from them. And that went on until there was a glitch that showed 3 weeks worth of returns all at once. And these writers turned around and they said, how did I sell negative copies on the platform? And then they got their explanation. And this kicked off something called Audiblegate. And Audiblegate was started by a writer in Perth, Australia named Susan May, and she roped in writers from all over the world, including a writer in the UK who was a recovering forensic accountant who had gotten burned out of the industry and started writing mysteries about forensic accountants, thrillers. And she said, you know, I'm going to go look at this because there's never just one cockroach. And she went and she checked, and not only were they clawing back the royalty once, she thinks that they were clawing back the royalties twice. And that also, they weren't calculating the royalties the way they said they would. They were giving you even less money than they said they were. And she did a bunch of detailed math, and she thinks that there's hundreds of millions of dollars in wage theft from Audible against its creators, against its creative workforce. And what's more, if you as a listener are disgusted by that, and you quit your Audible account, you can never listen to any of the audiobooks that you paid for again.
And so this is, I mean, they're getting it both ways, and that, in many respects, that's the idea of the choke point, right? Is that they're choke point both from the content producer and a choke point from the sake of the audience. The audience is roped in, the content producer is roped in, and there's this dynamic that you talk about that, you know, with the Amazon, it really is the most sort of, I think, explicit. We're going to create a you write about Amazon set out to create the to aggregate the audience so that it would force the suppliers to aggregate there and then basically lock everybody in. It is amazing though to think about the idea that, like, so I could read your book, not yours, but I could listen to your book, let's say on Audible, and then enjoy it, think it's great, return it, and then it's as if the author never sold the book.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And yes, as you mentioned, my books aren't typically for sale on Audible. There's a couple funny exceptions, though. The big one is that we took the chapter about why Audible is a scam, the audiobook chapter about how Audible steals from writers, and we made that an Audible exclusive. So you can go and get that from Audible, but it's the only part of our book that you can get there. We ran a Kickstarter to fund an amazing audiobook production because, you know, obviously publishers don't want your audiobook rights if you're not going to sell it on Audible because that's 90% of the market. We raised about $100,000 and pre-sold a lot of copies and got this amazing reader named Stefan Rudnicki, I beg your pardon, who you may know as like the voice of Ender in the Ender's Game audiobooks. He's won a bunch of Emmys and Hugo Awards and so on. He's got this incredible voice, and you can get that audiobook anywhere that's not Audible. So Google Play allows you to sell books without DRM, and you can get it on Libro.fm and Downpour.com and Bandcamp, and you can get it from my own store, crowdfund.com/shop. And in all of those places, it's sold without DRM.
All right, so let's talk about YouTube a little bit. I mean, and I think we're going to be talking to. I know you cover Live Nation. I think we're going to be talking to some folks from the American Prospect who just wrote a big piece about Live Nation. But let's talk about YouTube in terms of like choke points there.
Yeah, well, YouTube, is an example of how going to sleep on antitrust law for 40 years allowed companies to grow not by being great, but by being rich. So Google is a company that has only made 3 successful products, right? They made a really good search engine, a pretty good Hotmail clone, and a browser that's great to use, except that it spies on you like crazy. And everything else that they tried to build in-house failed, including things like Google Video. And all their successes, including their whole mobile stack, their ad tech stack, their server management tools, all of it are companies that they bought from someone else, including YouTube, which is a service that they couldn't compete with, and so they bought. As Mark Zuckerberg notoriously once said in a memo that has come back to haunt him, it is better to buy than to compete. And YouTube has got this incredible lock-in as well. It has the same kind of aggregated audience that it gets by self-preferencing within the Google ecosystem. So, Google puts YouTube links at the top of its search results and so on. And it also has a lock on the advertising market. Google and Facebook together control about 80% of the display advertising and search advertising market. And they've rigged that market. The Texas Attorney General case against Facebook includes against Google, includes the publication of the infamous Jedi Blue memos, where Google and Facebook got together to rig the ad market, which means it's very hard to sell ads or buy ads without buying them from them, and they skim off 50% or more once all the fees and so on are calculated in. So if you're a creator, you really have to be on YouTube. It's very hard to be anywhere else. And in the early days of YouTube, the studios and the labels really went nuts on YouTube and sued them like crazy in lots of different ways. The most notorious one was a Viacom lawsuit where they were seeking to put YouTube out of business and then assimilate it as a division of Viacom. There were a bunch of internal emails published as part of that lawsuit where all these little prince links within Viacom were arguing among themselves about which one would get to run YouTube once they'd broken its back. And as a consequence of these copyright cases that were brought against YouTube, YouTube voluntarily introduced this thing called Content ID, where anyone can upload, anyone who's in the service can upload a clip and say, this is my copyrighted work, and if you hear or see anything that looks like this being uploaded into YouTube, I get to control it. I get to decide whether it can be published at all, and if it is, I get to take all the money that's generated from its production. And there are lots of ways that this has come to harm artists. So you have some artists who invest a lot of money in producing videos on YouTube, only to have unscrupulous third parties come along and file fake copy strikes against them. And if you get 3 copy strikes against your account, it's terminated forever. And so these guys will file 2 fake copy strikes against an artist and then come back at them and say, if you don't want that third to hit, then you're going to have to pay me ransom. You're going to have to pay me a share of your income. And as we know, you're never going to reach anyone who's a live human being at YouTube to actually sort this out. There have been a couple of high-profile cases where YouTube caught these guys, but you have to imagine that there were lots where they didn't. Much more above board and well understood is what happens to classical musicians. So if you're a classical musician, you're performing compositions that are long out of copyright, hundreds of years old, and the definitive recordings of most of those belong to one of the big 3 record labels, Sony. So 70% of all the recordings in the world are owned by Sony, BMG, and Universal. And they got those not by investing in them, but by buying up other labels at fire sale prices during various economic downturns. And Sony has put Content ID strikes up for all of the classical performances of all the classical music. And if you're a pianist at home on lockdown, as many were, or a musician at home on lockdown and uploading recordings and hoping to monetize them through your Patreon or through an ad or through selling music lessons or what have you, you would find that your music was being taken down and that you were getting copy strikes or being demonetized and your money was being harvested by Sony, which managed to claim effectively a kind of pseudo copyright over every performance of these public domain recordings. You could contest their claims, their automated claims, but Sony would often come back and say, no, this is really our copyright and we insist that you YouTube demonetize it or take it down.
And to be clear, there's no validity to that claim. It is just brute force at that point by the the copyright holder of a different performance.
Yeah, that's right. It's basically that, if you are someone who knows senior executives within Google, you can get stuff done. And you will often see this happen on social media. Back when Twitter worked, you would often see people who had high-profile accounts being petitioned by their fans to say, hey, I'm a small-time classical pianist. My music was taken down by Sony. No one at YouTube will listen to me. You've got a much bigger account. Will you retweet this? Or, I know you, I saw you once did a talk at Google. Could you email the person who booked you in and see if they would forward a complaint to someone at YouTube so it'll be looked at by a human being? And whereas if you're Sony, you've just got like a person whose phone number you have at YouTube. And so you can solve your problems with a call.
I will say this, that when at one point we were getting, like when we would do the show, we kept getting copyright strikes on YouTube from, I think it was AP UK or Reuters UK. And it was for stuff that like, we got this from C-SPAN. We got this, like, this is not what and we didn't have, like, now we have like a representative that I can email and say, hey, why did we get this copyright strike? Sometimes it's because we've said stuff that is, we don't get copyright strikes that much anymore, to be honest with you. But that changed. And that's just because we got, at one point 1 million subscribers, and when we got the guy.
Yeah.
And your average person doesn't have the opportunity for this at all. But isn't part of this also a function of these, particularly like Facebook and YouTube, not wanting to spend money on actual content moderation? And it's just all based on like, sort of like, they're trying to save money. Well, I'm saying in terms of like the way that these things get that broken. I mean, I know there's other aspects to this, but in this specific instance, there's just no people working there to do this because they don't want to pay for those people.
So it's definitely the case that if they paid more people to investigate these moderation claims, that more of these moderation claims will get cleared. But I'm skeptical that a meaningful number of them could get cleared. I think that if you hired every copyright lawyer who was ever born or whoever will be born, that you would still not be able to adjudicate every copyright question that arises out of these giant platforms. The problem isn't just that they're understaffed. It's just like the problem with, say, Facebook is not that they have an insufficient number of people to kind of go through the 3-ring binder in which they've expressed the policy for moderating the conversations of 3 billion people speaking 1,000 languages in 100 countries. The problem is that there isn't a binder thick enough or a workforce large enough to make sense of that project. It's a fool's errand. And by allowing all of the video to get aggregated into this one platform, which is not a market function, it's not that YouTube was the best, it was that YouTube was the company that was bought by the company that could leverage its search dominance and its ad dominance and its other forms of dominance like mobile to become the dominant video platform, now only to be challenged by TikTok, which has its own set of unfair competitive advantages, most notably the fortunes and power of the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese Communist Party, that it was able to get this dominant position such that its failings become so important. As people start to rethink whether they want to be on Twitter, the problem of Twitter is coming into much sharper focus, which is not merely that Twitter made mistakes in how it moderated its content, but also that if you didn't want to put up with those mistakes and you quit Twitter, you quit something that mattered a lot, right? It became the one conversation that mattered a lot to a lot of people, for emotional support, for news, for access to emergency services, for conversations with people they love, or for an audience, for a creative laborer. And what that meant was that those mistakes mattered in an enormous way. And just like when we allow our country to dwindle to 4 airlines, and then one of them turns out to be Southwest Airlines during Christmas week, and they cancel thousands and thousands of flights, that is a huge problem in a way that it wouldn't be if we still had 25 airlines.
Right.
And Southwests were just around the margin. For one thing, when Southwest started to cancel all those flights, American Airlines was able to start charging $10,000 or more for one-way tickets that were domestic coach because there was so many people who were scrambling to get on, and it had all that pricing power. So, one way to make companies less harmful is to take away their power to do harm. And, not just to make them work well, but to make them fail gracefully. And graceful failure means that you just can't be that important, right? It's that by allowing these companies to amass these monopolies, we allowed them to become so structurally important and so unmanageable that it was inevitable that they would fail and that those failings would be very consequential.
Right. I mean, that has always been my sort of take on Twitter, is that the issue is they shouldn't be a town square. There shouldn't be a town square that is privately owned. I'm not sure how you would go about having the government own it per se, but certainly if we can't come up with a scheme for some type of Twitter co-op, there's no way that it should be big enough that it's the town square. I mean, that's the problem. We should be able to go.
I mean, I think that's what Mastodon is attempting, not a publicly owned Twitter, but a Twitter replacement whose ownership is spread out among lots and lots of entities, including some government entities. There are local governments already setting up their own Mastodon instances. So, you don't have to have someone else verify that the county commissioner who's tweeting from your county is themselves. You can tell because they're posting from the server owned by your county that only hosts official accounts that it's them. And what that means is that you can have something that looks a lot more like our current town structure, where you have public sidewalks and public parks and also private speech forums like universities or concert halls or even cafes. And it's not everything is owned by the government, but it's also not that everything is owned by one company or indeed that everything is private and owned at all.
Well, let's move into the sort of the solutions, because you do dedicate half the book essentially to solving these problems. Let's start with antitrust. I guess. I mean, and how would we go about saying, how would we as a society say that a Twitter should not exist, or how would we go about saying that Spotify shouldn't be able to essentially exploit the existence and the labor of all these musicians to the benefit of very few musicians, but largely to the record companies?
Yeah, there's an old joke whose punchline is, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. So, the story of Spotify doesn't start with some Swedish sociopath waking up and deciding to destroy the livelihoods of a bunch of musicians. It starts with the record labels merging to a cartel of three large firms. And so, historically, we didn't let firms do this. Up until the Reagan era, we had rules about these predatory acquisitions. We didn't let firms merge into monopoly. We blocked those mergers, and our current FTC chair, Lena Khan, who is a force of nature and a superhero and a first-in-a-generation antitrust enforcer who's really back on the job with a vengeance, has said that future mergers are going to be subject to the kind of scrutiny that we employed from the New Deal right up until the Reagan era. So that's some of the problem taken care of. But the rest of the problem is that we have all these existing monopolies.
Right.
And breaking up those monopolies is a great idea, but it's a slow process. So AT&T, from the first time the Department of Justice tried to break up AT&T until they managed it in 1982, was a 69-year slog. I don't want to wait 69 years for Sony or BMG or Twitter or Google to be broken up. And so we need some other tactics. So in the back half of the book, we have all these tactics for weakening the power of these large firms, because the reason it took 69 years to break up AT&T is they were rich as hell. And they were really structurally important to a lot of different important stakeholders. Like in the 50s, when AT&T was about to be broken up, the Pentagon weighed in and they said, we're going to lose the war in Korea if you break up AT&T. Now, they lost the war in Korea anyway, but AT&T got a 30-year stay of execution. And so we need to make them less important. We need to make them less powerful. And the second half of the book really goes into detail on how we can do that. So one of them is something we were just talking about, what's happening with Mastodon, which is to add interoperability to these services, these large tech services. So if you are required by law, as the European Union is going to require as of this month under the Digital Markets Act, to allow third parties to connect to your service, and provide ways for people to quit your service but keep their audiobooks or keep their address books and continue to message the people who stay behind on a social media service, or keep their access to their calendars or their other services, then it's just much harder to keep people locked in. If you can get rid of your iPhone but keep your apps, or get rid of your Android phone but use your apps on iOS or whatever, then you are in a much better position. It's much harder for that company to abuse you. You know, it's once you're locked in, that's how they can really turn the screws on you. We can also take away their right to block third parties from adding interoperability. If you're a computer user of a certain age like me, you'll remember when Apple solved its problems with Microsoft by cloning Microsoft Office and releasing the iWork suite, which has Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, where they reverse engineered all of the Microsoft Office file formats so that you didn't have to throw away your Mac and buy a PC in order to talk to people who had Windows machines. You could just use Apple's reverse engineered clone of the flagship Windows program. If you tried to do that to Apple today, they would sue you under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and they'd say you were a tortious interferer with their contracts and just all kinds of nasty stuff. And so one thing we can do is defend the right of interoperators to do unto Apple and Google and Facebook as they did unto all the firms that came before them. And that would carry us a long way down the road too.
Okay, so let me just stop you there for a moment. So does that have to be a statutory fix? So this ability, like I can write something in Pages and I can export it to Microsoft Word, and I can send that doc to somebody, and et cetera, et cetera. Or I could, let's say theoretically, take my Audible books and play them on, Cory's audiobook player by, maybe a conversion. Maybe another company comes in and provides like a converter, or, all my real audio stuff that I had from Real Player, I could convert into something that is actually not a virus or something like that. Does that have to be a statutory change, or can that be
it could be regulatory as well?
Okay.
Yeah, so it could be regulatory. So, under Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act, the FTC has very broad discretion to prohibit anti-competitive conduct. We just saw Chairwoman Khan rather, introduce a new rule just before the new year that prohibits non-compete contracts.
Yes.
On just under that authority. One of our suggestions in the book is to prohibit non-compete contracts. You don't need statutory authority for that. The other thing is that these companies are already violating all kinds of laws, right? It's not like they're Boy Scouts who figured out how to color within the lines, but the lines are very sloppily drawn, and so they can get away with all kinds of bad stuff. They're habitual recidivists. They're career criminals. And every now and again, the FTC or another agency, the DOJ, will investigate them, will bring them to justice, and then will offer them a settlement. And settlements are pretty flexible. These companies don't want to end up in court. They want to just sort of walk away. And historically, the price for walking away has been a fine. And as we all know, a fine is just a price. But settlements can also require structural remedies. So they could say, for example, well, as a condition of the settlement, if you want to sue someone who you say is hacking your service, it has to go through a special master who determines whether or not you are just doing this pretextually to shut down interoperability, or whether it really is someone who's trying to break into your service. Like Facebook has repeatedly threatened New York University School of Engineering, who have a thing called Ad Observer, where Facebook users voluntarily install a plugin that gets all the ads that they see. And all that they're trying to do is figure out whether Facebook is living up to its legal obligation to police paid political disinformation. They keep finding that Facebook has failed. Facebook is trying to sue them under Section 12, or threatening to sue them under Section 12.1 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, effectively saying that they're hacking Facebook by looking at by keeping a record of which ads are being shown. And so, if you had a special master who, before Facebook could file a lawsuit, had to just look it over and make sure that it passed the giggle test, we could inspire a lot of confidence in third parties who wanted to go beyond just checking Facebook's ads, but also doing things like what Friendly Browser does, which is another company that Facebook has repeatedly threatened, that allows you to see just the feeds from your friends and not have to look at the ads and not be tracked by Facebook.
And to be clear, the value of getting rid of the NDAs are not just the non-compete. Sorry, the non-compete clauses. It's not just the $300 billion annually that workers are being basically, its impact on suppression of wages, which they've estimated is up to like $2,000 per worker in some instances, and we're talking 20 to 45% of the workers in the states. But it also will open up the opportunity for companies to do, and for startups to do the thing you're talking about. Like I remember back in the early days of Twitter, there were all sorts of like add-ons to Twitter. There were different types of like Twitter readers. You didn't necessarily need to use the Twitter interface. There were people developing like TweetDeck, that may still be around, but there were other versions of it that were much better ways of sort of like reading tweets. I remember we had like a feature on the show that Kyle had made that people could donate one tweet a day to the show to promote what we wanted to promote. And Twitter basically made it impossible to do that. Having non-compete would allow people to leave a company like Twitter and essentially create maybe more often stuff that would work with Twitter, make it better for a user experience. And this is something that the FTC, that's the value of the non-compete.
Yeah, well, it's funny because in tech, non-competes are usually not enforceable because most tech companies are in California. And it's quite a story about how California came to have Silicon Valley in it, which is that, the guy who invented the silicon semiconductor, the person for whom Silicon Valley is named, was this lunatic called Robert Shockley. And Shockley became an ardent eugenicist. And he took his $1 million Nobel money plus a bunch of investor capital, and he went out to Silicon Valley, what is now Silicon Valley, to create the very first microchips. But he never built one because he was so obsessed with touring the country, trying to find women of color whom he could pay $100 to get sterilized. And he became this paranoid, brooding nutcase who no one could work for, no one wanted to work for, and nothing happened at his company, at Shockley Semiconductor. And 8 of his top engineers quit, and they founded a rival company called Fairchild Semiconductor. They called them the Treacherous 8, that made the first successful semiconductors. And the 8 of their top engineers quit and started a company called Intel. And all of that is possible only because California doesn't have enforceable non-competes. And when you contrast that with other high-tech centers like the corridor around MIT, where non-competes are enforceable, you see that those are places where great high-tech ideas go to die. Because if you have a great idea and you go to work for a company that's run by a monster, as so many of them are, then if you quit, you can't work in the field for another 3 years. And so that means that all the innovation that we're supposed to be seeking and praising, all of that stagnates.
Let's talk a little bit about limits on copyright contracts. I mean, that seems somewhat self-evident, but that basically just frees up. That copyright was supposed to be. Well, walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So copyright now lasts an extraordinarily long period. It's 90 years for works of corporate authorship, life plus 70 years for works of individual human authorship. And those extraordinarily long-lived copyrights are the ammunition that these aggregators use to control the industry. The reason that Sony and Warner and Universal were able to aggregate 70% of the recordings is that the recordings weren't entering the public domain. And so once they got hold of them, they were theirs sort of for the foreseeable future. That's changed a little bit recently just because we just got the first recordings going into the public domain a couple of years ago since 1998. And now there's a few going into the public domain every year. It'll be more soon as we move forward in terms of the public domain threshold into the 30s and 40s when you've got a lot of recordings that are still extant. So we'll be able to release those public domain. But in the meantime, these very long live recordings gave these firms the power to control the future of their industry. And the thing is that they didn't have to pay very much to get those copyrights, especially the copyrights that came from artists who are at the start of their career. When you're at the start of your career, you have very little negotiating leverage. It's really easy to screw you over. And it was this was something that was recognized in the earliest copyright systems in the United States. The founder's copyright, the first copyright that the U.S. had, endured for 14 years, but could be renewed once for another 14 years, but only by the natural author, only by the creator. And so if you sold your book to a publisher and 14 years later it was still selling well, your publisher couldn't maintain their exclusive right to it unless they could convince you to renew the copyright. And that was the moment at which you could turn around to the publisher and say, well, let's talk about what my share really should be. And so this was a way to ensure that the works that were very successful ended up having that success not just redound to an intermediary like a publisher or a label or a studio, but to the creative worker who did the work. In the 1976 Copyright Act, there was in the original statutory language, there was a 25-year automatic reversion, which meant that if you signed a copyright contract, no matter what the letter of the contract said, after 25 years, you got your copyright back. And so if you signed a book deal and your book was still successful 25 years later, your publisher would have to come to you and entice you to renew the deal. And so that would give you some negotiating leverage, again, for those successful works. That was watered down at the 11th hour, and the termination clause that we have now kicks in after 35 years, and it requires a lot of pretty gnarly paperwork. Nevertheless, it's been a huge boon to creators. The women who created the Babysitters Club and Sweet Valley High books terminated their copyrights and are now able to own those copyrights and resell them separately. So if there's a young person in your life you bought those books for, you're directly benefiting those creators in a way that they were denied the benefit of under the bad contracts that they signed originally. Stephen King terminated the copyright on his first half dozen novels. And George Clinton, who was defrauded out of his copyrights by an unscrupulous manager, finally gave up on suing that manager and instead just terminated the false transfer and got his copyrights back. You know, the reason George Clinton is still touring his music when he's in his 70s is not because he's an unstoppable funk god. I mean, he is, but it's also because he's broke, because all of his money was stolen, because his copyrights were stolen. And so we could put termination back in. The direction of travel has been the other way around. Instead of making it easier, we've been making it harder. In fact, there was some must-pass legislation that a congressional staffer slipped a single line into that no one noticed or debated that took away termination rights from musicians. And this was so controversial when it came out and so outrageous that Congress actually sat down and amended the past legislation to remove that line, whereupon that staffer quit and became the head of the Recording Industry Association of America. That staffer's name was Mitch Bainwall, and he is currently making millions of dollars heading up the lobby that tells us that they are the people who defend the interests of recording artists. And so, you know, we could make termination automatic. We could make it automatic after a shorter period of time. You know, it's a lot of termination is exercised by heirs. So we see the heirs of Steve Ditko and Stan Lee trying to terminate the transfer of the Marvel characters to Marvel Inc., which would mean that Disney would lose the Marvel characters, which would be a pretty interesting circumstance. And, you know, as a working artist who has an heir, I have a 14-year-old daughter, you know, the idea of her getting some residual income from my work is nice. But, you know, if we want to improve the lives of creators and of their children, the way to do it is to make sure that we're rebalancing the distributional outcomes while those creators are alive. So 35 years is too long. 20 years would be great. 25 would be acceptable. And making it automatic, clearing the bureaucratic hurdles would be even better.
All right. And there's a lot more these type of fixes in the book. Let's just lastly talk about, like, how does this become a movement? Like, how do people talk about this sort of, I guess, basket of solutions or in this sort of genre of problems within the context of our society? How do they address them without having to sort of like go through the specific instances of which we're talking about?
So look, no two labor markets are the same, but they all have comparable or similar contours. So, creators have some distinctive characteristics to their labor situation. The most important one is that the thing that's supposed to help us get a better shake, copyright, is really bad at it under conditions of market concentration. Giving an artist more money when there's only 3 record labels is like giving a bullied kid extra lunch money. The kids aren't going to get to keep their lunch money. The bullies are just going to take it at the gates. You need to clear the gates in order to get that to get them fed. So and creators also have what they call vocational awe, which is to say that our job matters to us and we do it even if we're badly paid. This is something that we share with a lot of the caring sectors like teachers and nurses and doctors. And you see similar tactics being applied to creators as are applied to those caring workers. And so we have a lot in common with them. But, we also have a lot in common with, say, Uber drivers, because Uber drivers are also living through a choke point where you have people who want rides and you have people who want to drive. And then you have this rent seeker in the middle that's sucking all the value out of the system and increasing the price of the ride and decreasing the compensation for the ride and returning the difference to their shareholders. And Uber drivers showed us the way to solve this, which is that they organized, even though they couldn't unionize, they organized collectively. And they were able to do something called a mass arbitration claim in California that resulted in Uber paying them $150 million to compensate for stolen wages. And so it's only by reaching out across these sectors and finding the way that we have commonality, the way that everyone who has vocational awe and is in the caring trades or the arts has the same contours, everyone who's in a choke point has the same contours, and understanding that your fight is my fight, that we can make the difference. One of the people we quote in this book is James Boyle, who's a copyright scholar. He runs the Center for the Public Domain at Duke University with Jennifer Jenkins. And Jamie says that before the term ecology was coined, it wasn't really clear that people who cared about different issues were fighting on the same side. If you care about owls and I care about the ozone layer, are we really fighting the same fight? Are charismatic nocturnal avians somehow connected to the gaseous composition of the upper atmosphere? Well, they are, but only if you know the term ecology. And then all of a sudden, those 1,000 issues become a single movement and it gets stuff done. And our goal with this book is not just to sketch out or indeed, give a detailed explanation of how creative labor markets were rigged, but also to explain how those are common with all the other labor markets that have been rigged in their own way. And the details are different, sure, but the cause is the same. Excessive corporate power is at the root of the immiseration of every kind of worker. And we all have the same fight.
Cory Doctorow, the book is Chokepoint Capitalism, How Big Tech and Big Content Captured Creative Labor Markets, How We'll Win Them Back, co-written with Rebecca Giblin. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. I really enjoyed it. Let's figure out how we can do it with video next time. I love chatting with you. Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, Cory. All right, folks. We will now head into the fun half of the program. Definitely worth a read. The first half is like things get a little weedy in that book. But the solutions to these problems is, it's really, there's a lot of solutions here. And again, like, I think there's a portion of our audience that would, for whom reformation of capitalist systems is not necessarily on the agenda. But it has always been my contention that to the extent that we're going to be able to wrest power from capitalists, if that is what you're interested in, they need to be weakened before that happens. This is not a situation where they're such huge behemoths and they control so much money and they have so much commensurate political power that it's going to be easy to trip them on some type of tripwire and they're going to fall that much harder. That is not my belief. My belief is that reform to the entire system. I don't know if revolution is possible, but I mean, if that's what your is on your agenda is possible, minimizing the power, the political power, by minimizing the financial power of those people who would stand in your way is a very helpful thing to do.
Well, yeah, and I like this point about how like you can't reforms without dealing with that concentration are only going to accrue to the benefit of the concentrators. Like that's why we made the joke way back when we did the Chicago live show. We did like landlords for UBI,
right?
Because if you don't start dealing with those sorts of rentiers and sort of corporate monopolies, they take all the cash out of the system when it's there.
Absolutely, and this dynamic, I mean, it also shows you like something like the value of what the FTC is doing just in terms of these non-compete. It's going to put money into the pockets of workers, maybe up to like, up to 45% of the workers in this country. 20 to 45% is the estimate. And thousands of dollars annually. But it's also going to have a lot of knock-on impacts in terms of like the corporate power.
Yeah.
And so there's just a tremendous amount of value in what's happening in that sort of like antitrust silo of the Biden administration. And also understand is these things can be reversed, but not so easily. Because they can be undercut without a doubt, and they can lie dormant for a certain period of time. But once the structure and the understanding of antitrust law changes, the entire system starts to conform in that way, and it is really like like an aircraft carrier. Once you get it turned in a certain direction, it takes a long time to push it back. And right now, we're just fortunate enough to have like someone who is really, really dedicated at the FTC to these concepts and smart about it. We had a couple of interviews with Lena Khan over the years. I think when she was at least one book that she wrote. I can't remember.
I feel like we might have best of'd one of them.
Yes, but. Cory, we've had for the past 2 weeks, I feel like we've had a couple of early best ofs for 2023.
Starting off strong.
Damn. Folks, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member by joining the Majority Report today at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you support the show, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you not only get the fun half, but you allow the show to survive and thrive, and bring on guests like Cory Doctorow and then others. We've already had best of. Look, not even 2 weeks into the season, we have 2 shows.
We're still
already
in single digit
in the
days.
can. It's amazing. Don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off. Emma will be back in 2 days, so no
Monday show, but we'll be doing a bigger Thursday show. So the 12th when she gets back, she'll be back Wednesday, but we'll be doing an ESPN bigger show and picks segment for the first round of the NFL playoffs this coming weekend on Thursday. YouTube.com/ESPN show for more of that.
She must be pretty excited about the Giants sneaking in.
Oh yeah, she's pumped, and sorry about the Pats, Sam.
I don't want to talk about it. Matt, what's happening in the MLM? Matt Leck Media.
Yeah, in MLM we have tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time on Left Reckoning. We will be having 2 guests to celebrate Left Reckoning's 100th episode of Left Reckoning 100. Yep, that's the vibe we're gonna have. We have Brian Meir on to talk about the everything going down in Brazil, including the sort of reprise of Jan 6th and Jan 8th. Although I do think we have a little bit of American-centric view on things, and maybe the Bolivia coup attempt might also be a little bit of a precedent.
Well, let's be clear. Our January 6th was just a knockoff version of a couple of these things that happened.
Yeah.
And that was the point was like, hey, wait a second, it can happen here. But I I think it's just because Bolsonaro was so like closely associated with Trump. And in many respects, like, I don't know without Trump if you get Bolsonaro in terms of like what the ruling class is sort of like, the baseline becomes so.
It's very strange because like they are not like, you know, who you'd want for like the quiet leader installed by a military coup, for instance. Like they're both too flamboyant and detested by the people. But it is interesting how like Lula, when he talks about, he mentions Miami, and the way he says Miami, it's because all those people associate Miami with the CIA. That's where the Bay of Pigs stuff was all staged. It was massively intelligence location for most of the Cold War. So it's interesting how this stuff is playing out and how the people who you would think who want to take advantage of it can't quite avail on it.
Yep.
Just take an election.
All right, 646-257-3920 is the number if you want to be a part of this program. Also, you can get the app, majorityapp.com. The iOS app has been redone. The Android app has not been deployed yet, but I think today Kyle is going to be trying it out. I think we're very close. So go get the free app, folks. Enjoy it. Also, AM Quickie at amquickie.com. You can join up through the app, or at least the new iOS app, and get a great email blast from our own Cory, not Cory Doctorow, Cory Pine.
I also have to say, this month, January 22nd, live show at the Cutting Room, Left Reckoning, This is Revolution, Give Them an Argument, Sam Seder, unless he's going to check his calendar right now, Emma Vigland, and other guests. If you're in New York and want to see us, check out. We'll put the link in the show notes.
No, I just remembered that Ben had contacted me about maybe coming on to the show, and I had forgotten about that. I'm going to respond to him right now. This is what I forget about stuff. All right. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. black African, and the alpha males are black, 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 and the Africans are back, 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 back. Black, black, black,
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em, fuck 'em.
Things I do for the bigger game plan.
By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are black, black. Africans are back, back.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy, 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 pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Emma is out. Bradley and Matt are here. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 973 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Hi, this is Jack from New Jersey.
Jack from New Jersey. What's on your mind?
So, with the recent debacle over the weekend of the Never Kevers losing and the House Republicans getting concessions over them, we've been seeing a lot of familiar faces pop up touting how they would have been right to force the vote a few years ago.
Okay.
I would like your input on this idea. If the Democrats, the Progressive Caucus, were to attempt to do something similar to what the Republicans just did, wouldn't we see mainline Democrats try to get concessions from center-right Republicans rather than concede to the progressives and use that as a way to tout that we are able to be bipartisan while these obstructionists, AOCs and Elon Omars are trying to just, do whatever they want.
I mean, look, there were so many problems with well, first off, let's just start with the ask, right? The ask at the time was to have a losing vote on Medicare for all, because the theory was this is going to galvanize the American public once they see that only 120 members of the Democratic caucus, I'm estimating, maybe it could have been higher because they would have known it wouldn't pass anyways, in support of Medicare for all. Suddenly the veil would lift from people's eyes and there would be some type of uprising and we would get Medicare for all. That was the theory. Put that aside. You've got a cohort of, at least in terms of the squad, of a much smaller amount of people than the 20 members of the Freedom Caucus that was there. But the dynamics of everything were different. Kevin McCarthy was underwater with the Republicans in terms of favorability. Nancy Pelosi at 65%. The Republicans, number one on their agenda is nothing. Is literally just doing hearings. There's no legislation for them to pass. Number one on the agenda for the Democrats was to pass a $2.3 trillion bill, which was going to provide child tax credit, extension of unemployment insurance, expansion of unemployment insurance, $1,400 checks. I mean, on and on and on, which had been promised, in the Georgia runoff. So the basic terrain, dramatically different. But yes, you also had people like Spanberger. There was like 3 or 4 people, Connor Lamb, maybe. I can't remember who the other 2 or 3 were, who were already voting against, were already voting present, I think, if I remember correctly, against Pelosi. Quite possible, because we heard conversations like this coming from the Republicans that like they would, maybe make a deal with Democrats. But the problem is that For Republicans to do that is far more toxic to any given Republican than it would have been for some of the blue dog Democrats to do that, both in terms of their constituency, but also in terms of the way it's going to be reported by the media. The way that the media has always treated the sort of like the conservatives versus their counterparts on the left has been very disparate. And so, yeah, I think everything you're talking about was certainly possible, that they would have defected to vote for McCarthy, that they would have come up with a a so-called compromise candidate on the right. I mean, any of those things could have happened. Look, it was possible that Hakeem Jeffries could have become speaker. Theoretically, I mean, you had a half a dozen or three or four Republican who were voting for McCarthy. One wanted to go to their wife's funeral or their mother's funeral. One wanted to go by their sick wife. One wanted to go with their sick kid. That's why things had to come to a head on Friday night, so that those people could leave. But there is a world that's not hard to imagine that it didn't come to a conclusion on Friday night, that there was no Donald Trump figure to call and sort of like lean on people to come to a deal. So I don't know. Anything could have happened.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Sam.
Enjoy
the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, to your point, Sam, the 2021 speaker race, the three presents on the Democratic side were Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey, Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, and Spanberger. Connor Lamb voted for Hakeem Jeffries, and Jared Golden of Maine voted for Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois.
So who knows where that would have landed?
Yeah.
I mean, leverage exists. Part of using leverage is also to understand the limitations. Like, it's like, if I've got a two pair, and it may mean something different in one context than in another context. Depends on, there's a lot of factors.
Well, you should listen to the people who don't want you to be at that poker table at all.
Well, that's the other thing, is that it was quite clear that, that must have been an amazing moment for people when the 4 or 5 freshman House members that they wanted to force a losing vote, and they finally realized, we should be promoting a third party like they did 4 years earlier. I mean, look, it's perfectly, people can have a position where they think a third party is a better choice.
It'd be nice. It might help the progressives if there was a actual realistic third party.
Yeah, certainly on the congressional front. I mean, a third party that would actually run in congressional races would be quite helpful, frankly.
Opposed to a counter media operation.
Exactly. But at least, is the People's Party still in existence?
Oh, they're tweeting. They tweeted to Grimm saying, the Dems should have listened to them because it would have proven that it's pointless to work within the Democratic Party.
Right. No, I get that. Calling from a 321 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Marcus the Brazilian. How's it going?
Marcus the Brazilian. How fortuitous. Apparently some stuff going on in Brazil.
Oh, yeah? What's going on over there? Haven't really been paying close attention.
Just some boomers. Just some boomers going to tour the Capitol and the Supreme Court and the executive residences. Just some boomers going out for a stroll.
Oh, I see. So just some casual fascists trying to replicate stuff going on over here.
How flamboyant of you to call them fascists. My goodness. Whoa. What an alarmist.
Yeah. All right. So I saw this coming. This wasn't a shock to me. I mean, it is and it isn't, but I saw this coming right after the election happened. And Bolsonaro didn't come out for 2 days, and when he did, he was very ambiguous on the results. And then you saw his supporters all over the country, and also showing up in the capital in Brasilia, upset, repeating the playbook of Trump here in the United States of, election fraud, which they were doing months before, the election was over. So I saw this coming, and I had family members, that I was warning this happening, and they were just kind of shrugging it off. So I have two family members that actually work. They're journalists over in Brazil, and they agreed with me. This is not good. Bolsonaro's like a dangerous person. But I was told, I was given some insider information that the heads of the media conglomerate made a decision to not really focus on Bolsonaro's ambiguous comments on the election, because they were afraid of fanning the flames with, fascist supporters within that group. So I,
didn't seem to work.
Decision. It didn't seem to work,
I mean, I think there are instances where, I suppose that theory could hold some water, and there are instances where, not so much. But it didn't seem to work in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my opinion is the media needs to do its job and point out things like that. Why isn't the president? What's happening here? Is he not taking into account the fact that he lost? What does this mean? I mean, but I think fear took a hold of the corporate media there, and but whatever. I mean, Lula though his response is completely different than of Biden's, right? I mean, as soon as this happened, the day of, Lula came out and made a statement that all these people involved, they're going to be found, and they're going to be, they're going to be punished to the full extent of the law. And immediately, buses of these insurrectionists started getting arrested. They're staying in hotels in Brasilia. They're quickly found, and they're collecting all this information of social media. I mean, there was a lot of people there. It's a lot of work to just but it's really upsetting to see these people. It's just so hypocritical and ironic that these people are holding Brazilian flags and wearing Brazilian football jerseys and going in and destroying government buildings and art that has been there. Those one video of one of these people holding the Constitution from 1988, I believe, or 86, and holding it up, and it's these people are clearly anti-democratic and they call themselves patriots. I wonder where they got that nomenclature, right?
Here is let's play some clips of this is from the Capitol building in Brasilia. This is I'm not sure at what point during the storming of the Capitol this took place, but let's watch this.
STF! Turning the dividers into rams. It's wild.
Bunch of boomers going in to tour the Capitol. It is the people's house there too, I imagine. So,
right. Yeah.
It's wild to see so many guys in the Brazilian colors and also in flip flops, just there to try to smash stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's, but let me ask you this. Were you I've talked about this in the office, and I think I even said this the other day. We've been for the past 4 or 5 week, we were getting footage. Bolsonaro first walking around in some type of condo association in Orlando, just like saying hi to the people living there. And then there was like footage of him in a supermarket. And it's like, okay, you know, I get it, but like, what? I just remember thinking like, why is the guy doing this? Why is he looking like, why would he make himself look so banal? Like he's already a retired, like, you know, like he's walking around like he's a retired, like New York City police officer, like walking around Florida, just like and
yeah, I'm just on vacation. I really wanted to go to Disney World.
Well,
Like-
but honestly, because I know my first reaction was like, oh, Bolsonaro's in Florida. And I knew this because of all the video that I had seen over the past week of him in Florida, not even like on like an ostentatious vacation or something like that, but just going out in public at like literally at a supermarket. And that did not strike me as the behavior of a guy like Bolsonaro after he's lost an election. You're like, you know what, dude, I'm sending one of my security guards to go to the supermarket. I'm not going to go and be seen as just like this. But the fact that he had been so visible in Florida, in my mind was like, oh, okay, he wasn't there. And I don't know. I can't help but think like
I'm not planning a coup alibi tour.
It's like, you know, I'm not involved in anything. I've been in Florida going to the supermarket. Everybody can see that. There's video of it.
Right. Yeah.
Super convenient.
Also, he probably feels like pretty safe being in Florida. I mean, Mar-a-Lago's not just a few steps away, you know. I don't know if I'm speculating if he's met with Trump or Bannon or whatever. My brother actually made a pretty funny comment saying if Ron DeSantis really wants to piss off Trump, he'll extradite Bolsonaro back to prison.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. Bolsonaro's apparently got a condo right next to Putin. Putin's like looking for a place down in Boca.
Man,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
I literally believe that.
I appreciate the call, Marcus.
Yeah, good talking to you. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Here's more footage of the pro-Bolsonaro rioters. They after they were dispersed from the Capitol building, they went on to continue their tour of Brasilia, where they're just sort of, you know, just checking out the sights, lighting stuff on fire,
beating horses,
like, you know, boomers will do.
Oi, pessoal, para ajudar vocês, aqui saindo da Marginal Pinheiros, chegando aqui na primeira ponte da Marginal Tietê, tá completamente interditado nos dois sentidos, não, tanto a expressa como a local, totalmente tomada, a coisa tá feia aqui.
And I saw people speculating, is this you know, a real coup attempt, or like just like a white riot? And my point is, like, white riots, if you want to call them that, are sort of the raw material or pretext or staging ground for coups.
Talk about South Carolina. What was it? 1880. Wilmington, South Carolina, just as an example. You had an entire state's, both all the politicians in there, but also really the entire state's 1898. Not for nothing, Steve Bannon was down. Steve Bannon was in the wake of the election back in late November, was trying to make the point. I imagine, I don't know where he was broadcasting from. I assume maybe just like some bunker somewhere, but
this might have been from his show. And Eduardo Bolsonaro's son, actually reposted this video.
He reposted this video yesterday, right?
No, he reposted in the wake of the November election.
Oh, okay,
to galvanize people.
Just to galvanize people as a way. I mean, who knows how much influence Steve Bannon has in this instance? I don't know. But think it was pretty clear that he's had contact with Bolsonaro. I mean, that is
and interesting in both cases that they did telegraph these things a few months out. That there was still some sort of clamoring months before of like, we got to keep fighting, we got to keep going.
Yep. Here's Bannon, just about a month and a half ago.
Look in the streets of Brazil. Look at the great patriots in Brazil that at a lot of danger to themselves have come forward and are in the streets of Brazil. And quite frankly, as much as I love the Bolsonaros, and Eduardo I think is going to speak tomorrow, and there's no better man on this globe than Eduardo Bolsonaro or his father. In Brazil, it's gone beyond the Bolsonaros. This is the people saying, no, you didn't follow the Constitution. You use these machines, you use the judiciary to shut us down in the media, and we're not going to tolerate it. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. Same in the United States. You know, the people like Kerry Lake are not going to give up, and I use as a warning in the great fight that you guys have in front of you, both for the cultural issues, for the political issues, and the economic issues. Once they start taking and digitizing the elections, once they start going to machines where you can't get paper ballot, you don't have proof of ID, you take it away from the precincts, and they start to centralize it in collection centers, that's all done for one reason. That's to consistently steal elections, because they know they don't have the backing of the people.
Well, there it is.
One thing I didn't know, Marina Oswald posted this on Twitter. This is from a 2000 article from Salon on the Brooks Brothers riot. According to Gigot, who was with Republican leaders at the protest, the GOP forces also threatened to unleash the vociferous Cuban-American community on the recount workers. 1,000 local Cuban Republicans were on the way, they said, but they never seemed to materialize. But it's just like, this is a playbook.
Yeah. Like shock troops.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Let's go to the phone. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it is Kowalski from Nebraska. Happy New Year.
Kowalski from Nebraska. Happy New Year. It sounds like you're on a machine right now.
I am. Is it too loud?
No, it sounds great. It gives your call a certain ambiance that it deserves.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm fertilizing the state, as all good Nebraskans should be doing. All the weather's decent. Speaking of weather, I was disappointed. Why was the weather report not at the top of the show?
I just didn't do it.
Oh, yeah, I guess, California isn't real America to, the actual heartland in Brooklyn.
That's right. Those West Coastal elites not that interested in reporting on their so-called rain situation. But there's huge storms, obviously, going on in California. They're getting just a tremendous amount of flooding. Biden has declared, I think, just when we started the show, state of emergency in California due to the storms. Is that right?
I'm not sure about the state of emergency, but it has definitely been like the biggest thing on like my radar on follow weather events. That and the heat wave in Europe. These two things have been massive in like the impact that it will have on the coming growing season and just like energy rates and stuff like that.
As of last night, Newsom had asked Biden to declare a state of emergency, but it hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet? Are you sure?
I'll double check. But just this.
No, I think it happened. I think it happened already.
KTLA in California 2 hours ago, Biden declared it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was from last night. Excuse me.
What do you see as the long-term implications of this? I mean, in Europe, obviously, the impact of this warmer weather is I think maybe changing the dynamic a little bit of European support, or making European support of the Ukrainians probably a little more durable, at least in the short term. What are the implications in terms of growing seasons?
Well, a big issue facing Europe at the moment is going to be a fertilizer shortage. Petroleum-based or petro-based fertilizers require natural gas to produce. Europe saw like a 5 to 10-fold increase in natural gas prices as a result of Russia's cutting off of oil resources, basically, which essentially made fertilizer not economic. So only two places were left to produce fertilizer, essentially the United States and I think China. So this could, if it keeps prices down, allow Europe to actually produce more fertilizer. There might actually just be availability, because that was another issue. Is like, even if it is largely expensive, I mean, people got to eat, so that's something a government should subsidize. But it could be good for the coming growing season. I have no idea what a heat wave means for trees or insects in Europe. I'm just not that familiar with that continent, but on part of like the cereal grains, it should be on the whole pretty good. Then with California, the long-term implications of this, I think, will actually not be all that great, because if there is a decent amount of water in the reservoirs when the new water compact is negotiated, everybody might not realize, oh, wow, we just had a once-in-a-thousand-year flood event that, bought us, the refilling of the reservoirs. Maybe we don't actually need to work on water restrictions and really thinking about how this will impact the ecology. So long-term, I don't think it would be good. Short-term, it's really, really good, because they definitely have moisture. So,
Well, good stuff in that regard. Appreciate the call.
All righty. You all have a good one.
Bye-bye. Let's go to some IM, shall we?
Don't lose track of Summers, too.
Oh, yeah, we'll get there. Kyle, testing from an Android app. Another test message sent. Sweet. Eddie Munster. Emma still on vacation? Is she in Florida plotting an MR coup? Yeah, she's just walking around a supermarket in Florida. No reason to worry.
She's at the JM Wave station.
Yes, a video emerged of her in a Publix just loitering.
Emma have been captured while leading the insurrection in Brazil. I've seen a photo of her with Bolsonaro tattoo on her shoulder. Between the 101 and the 5, insurrectionists of the world unite. Sunset Lake Sabadell is the best. I came home from the holidays after ordering new Candy Kush flavor, buy one, get one. My order had just been stolen from my mail area. They just confirmed that they're going to help me out. What a freaking awesome company. The light coup mob tactics sort of started in Florida with the hanging chads in 2000, and it worked. Yes, coincidentally. Daredevil, I hate this MR Nightbot. Disable that. Shh.
We just have to say we have to just do something with it after the show to make it a little bit less.
I mean, this is what happens when you have AI trying to.
There you go.
No, we'll figure it out.
Was my my decision.
I mean, I dragged my feet on Nightbot for a long time. Moderators will attest to that.
I tried to drag my feet as much as possible. Watching Matt Gaetz destroy his political career in real time is the most fun I've had in a while. Judy Giuliani, regimen, not regime. Drew from Vegas just wanted to send a special FU to Nick DiPaolo. An 18-year-old MMA fighter died recently, and his reckless ass used it to blame the COVID vax. She's the younger sister of two famous fighters, and reports are now coming out it was a suicide. So, yeah, really effing cool guy. Yeah, Nick is an idiot. And I say this not in this context of whatever he does now as a commentator about stuff, just from my own personal experience with him, that he was bigoted and stupid 25 years ago.
Everybody, those folks that died suddenly, sort of conspiracy theory about heart attacks and stuff and COVID is so stupid. That documentary literally has people collapsing before the vaccine was even out. And the idea that you would be
that's called anticipatory vaccination syndrome.
Exactly, like pre-vaxxed. But these sorts of things happen, and to the extent that there's myocarditis with the vaccines, vast majority of those rare cases are mild, and the myocarditis that comes from a severe case of COVID is way worse. So the idea that if we, let's say, and this isn't, I don't think, proven at all, do have a rise in heart attack events, and I'm not sure about this, but my first thing I would look at would be the new novel virus that is infecting people across the globe, and then the vaccine. But if you're only focused on one of those things and it's just the vaccine, you're not only hysterical, you're a moron.
Two kids in a trench coat. Sam bitches and moans about how Powell is using rate hikes to discipline workers, but Emma takes some time off to party, and all of a sudden the idea of disciplining workers sounds like a good thing. That's a good point, actually. Let's talk about the Fed. We still have, relatively speaking, in terms of like job gains. We are at a 50-year low on unemployment. 50-year low. We have seen the power of workers increase in terms of like the first time we've had in I don't know how many, maybe more than a decade, in terms of like any type of significant bump in wages. Now, not enough to have kept pace with productivity over the past 25 years. But in terms of a dynamic, relatively speaking, it's good. Inflation has slowed significantly. And yet the Fed is still insistent on disciplining labor. And we've talked about this over the past couple of weeks. I mean, austerity is deployed not, ostensibly under the cover of preventing inflation. We don't want the debt to get run away. We don't want the deficit to get run away. But it really is deployed as a way of disciplining labor, of making sure that labor doesn't become too powerful, both in terms of like as it is exhibited through wages, but in terms of working conditions, in terms of ability to move from job to job. And here is Larry Summers taking credit for influencing the Fed's, I want to say, inexplicable pursuit of rate hikes, but it's perfectly explicable if you feel that workers have gained too much power, that they're too willing to stage some type of labor actions. They're too willing to switch jobs or quit jobs. They're too willing to ask for a raise or higher working standards. Then all of a sudden what Powell's doing is not a miscalculation at all. It is, in fact, deployment of austerity in the form of raising interest rates. And here's Larry Summers in today's episode of completely oblivious to how we come off. There should be a, like, you know how they do that rating of your Zoom backgrounds?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they should do one on the scale of how much of an oligarch do you come across as?
I've been speaking in a different way about
Sorry, just
the
pause
Fed.
it. If you can hear that sort of roaring, what you're hearing is the ocean, if you're just listening, the ocean, which is visible behind him, the bright blue ocean on this nice morning.
Yeah, I mean, he is in, like, he had a choice too. He could be like, I'm going to shoot this in my hotel room.
Put a wall behind it. Yeah.
Or I'm going to show everybody that I'm literally, I don't know, is it like Hawaii or is it, or some Caribbean island or, like I'm in some vacation getaway. I mean, literally looks like he's in paradise.
I've been speaking in a different way about the Fed in the last couple of months than I had been before. And that's because, for whatever reason, they have come around to views quite close to mine. They think inflation is the primary concern. They explicitly recognize that there's going to need to be increases
Pause it.
in
Now pause it. I want you to go back. Understand what he says. They believe that inflation should be the primary concern. There are two mandates that the Fed has. One is keep inflation in check. And the second is try and provide for as much employment as possible. And the beauty of the way that they set this up was it implies, too, that there is a tension between these two things, that they're necessarily two sides of a coin. And the idea is we need to stand the coin on its edge. So that's perfectly balanced there. But the fact is that if you look at wage increases, it is not wages that is driving inflation. It is not a outmatched demand relative to supply that is driving inflation. maybe in specific sectors because of in the wake of COVID, but profiteering and using these excuses and frankly monopoly power have been driving up prices. And the monopoly power that comes from things like, oh, there's a logistics problem. I'm the only supplier of this. Or, oh, there's a logistics problem. I'm Amazon. I'm going to say I'm going to use monopsony. I'm going to say that, like, look, I usually buy 30 of these things. Well, I'm buying 70 and you're not selling it to anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's always frustrated me, this whole conversation, the way they use inflation, because like from our perspective, inflation is like the cost of milk or eggs or something like that. From them, I think they really are thinking like the cost of labor, like what does a worker cost? And we want to make sure that, and that's not to say that that's what's the cause for like the inflation that we all accept now, but they do not want to see that change at all.
And I don't even think it's just the cost in and of it. Like what are the wage increases? I really do think it is like, we need control over the workers.
Right.
They can't have the ability to switch jobs. They can't have the ability to find healthcare outside of employment. They can't have the ability to require better working standards, or like we saw with the freight trains, force us to hire more workers because we need to extract as much profit as possible from this, and we need the flexibility that comes with having a disempowered workforce, broadly speaking. So it's not even the wages directly in that moment. That's why, like, I think the mistake that as we were talking last week with our guest Claire
Mattei,
Claire Mattei, she was pointing out that this type of austerity comes part and parcel with our capitalist system. This is the way that it sort of deflates any type of threat that may come from an empowered labor. But here is Summer bragging about, like, by some stroke of who knows what, the Fed is sounding a lot like Larry Summers recently. Or maybe it's just that they're cut from the exact same cloth and they have the exact same agenda.
I've been speaking in a different way about the Fed in the last couple of months than I had been before. And that's because, for whatever reason, they have come around to views quite close to mine. They think inflation is the primary concern. They explicitly recognize that there's going to need to be increases in unemployment to contain inflation. They recognize the salience of labor market developments as a kind of super core measure of inflation. They're showing awareness of the fact that the neutral interest rate is a real interest rate concept rather than a nominal interest rate concept. They're recognizing that the trade-off is not between unemployment and inflation, but between unemployment and the level of entrenched inflation. These are the kinds of points that I've been stressing on your show for the past 18 months. And I think I'm gratified.
All right, do we need to hear the rest of it? There's nothing. But that point about entrenched inflation, okay? He's arguing if we don't disempower labor right now, i.e. increase unemployment, if we don't do that right now, this inflation is going to stick around here. But that does not account for the fact that the inflation rate has dropped significantly. Yes, we are still 7 points of inflation year over year. But 6 months ago, we were at 9.5 points of inflation, which means that the rate of inflation is decreasing. The trend is going in the right way, which explicitly contradicts the idea that this is durable. There's no doubt that some stuff is going to stay, prices are going to be raised because, you go get a slice of pizza right now and it's in some places like $1.50 more than it was 2 years ago. But that's because they know they can get away with it. The expectations have changed. We were all sold this, like, there's, broad inflation. Milk is now $8 a gallon. But in fact, what was really going on in a lot of instances, not all the instances, was that you had CEOs and corporations that were basically saying, like, we can jack up prices right now. And
blame Brandon. I mean, that's an awesome opportunity.
And blame Brandon. Or like, we don't have to invest in, we can take a year off from our capital investments so that we don't need to provide an increase in supply, because our agenda is not to make sure that supply in this one sector meets demand as much as our profits continue to grow. And one of the ways that we can grow our profits is instead pull back on investment in machinery or our productive capacity. Because remember, they had to pull back during COVID. Everybody did. Less workers, less products coming in to resell, less components coming in which to make things, and they could have a choice. Do we expend the money to reinvest in our productive capacity to get back to where we were in 2019 and produce as much as we were in 2019? Or do we just wait, make up the difference with profit? We'll sell less widgets, but we're going to charge 25% more because we don't have the ability to make as many widgets as we did before. So what used to be a volume business for us, we make a nickel on every widget and we sell 1,000. Well, now we can make 12 cents on every widget and sell 500. And incidentally, what also happens in that instance is not just that our profits go through the roof, my personal stock portfolio does too. Because my compensation is a function of my ability to cut costs. My compensation is a function of what our stock is doing, and Wall Street will reward you for cutting costs and increasing profits. I mean, so there it is. That's what's going on here. And he is loving it. And why wouldn't he? Because he's, look at that picture. Just don't even put up the video. Just put it. I mean,
man, I'm hearing like the White Lotus music.
What kind of ghoul do you have to be like, I mean, maybe he's constantly on vacation. Maybe he's constantly on vacation, so he doesn't like, oh, I'm going to take a little time from my time in paradise to go and applaud the fact that we are punishing workers.
Thousands of people. They just have to be like, we're going to immiserate you.
Millions!
Yeah. Exactly.
Millions! But we're doing it for the greater good. And by greater, I don't mean in terms of sheer numbers. I mean greater in terms of like, I'm better than you.
Yeah. And like we talk about like the deep state, and that just makes, I think, libertarians a little bit too. But this guy is part of like the state in a sort of way. Like he's making these giant determinations, like in a command and control economy. Just get back off of Summers there. Like we would see that as a decision the state's making. Instead, it's just like our capitalists get to decide. Like, oh, people are going to struggle.
This was Larry Summers' shared sacrifice moment. We're all going to have to share a sacrifice. Like for me, part of my sacrifice is right now I could be sitting on the beach, or I could be sitting on the beach, or getting a
completely empty beach with plenty of seat in there, like, but nobody else.
I could be sitting on the beach, or I could be at the spa right now getting a pedi, but no, I'm coming on, where is this, CNBC, and talking about how Bloomberg and rooting on the fact that we need to disempower workers. Shared sacrifice, ladies and gentlemen. That's called shared sacrifice. Calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Rachel. I'm calling from San Francisco, actually.
Hi, Rachel. What's on your mind?
I'm so obviously calling from San Francisco. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on. There's like a big vacancy rate in all these offices. I work downtown. I see the vacancies. I see how it's affecting small businesses. I'm curious as like I've seen the mayor talk about how we have to incentivize, property developers to, convert these office spaces into living spaces, and that would be, helping the homelessness crisis and et cetera. But, after speaking with small businesses, they're less incentivized to kind of have these, to incentivize these people to come in, because if their property values go down, this is pretty much like their only source of wealth, I guess, or like financial stability. But also on the other hand, like they're not getting the same type of traffic that they were before. So I guess I'm curious as to like,
I'm not sure I follow. The small businesses own their own places. Is that it?
Well, a lot of them do, right? So a lot of them have like their base of wealth, or I guess like financial stability, from what I've understood. And I could be entirely wrong. This is like me speaking to like the businesses that I've been to around where I live. They're afraid of property values decreasing if there were to be, like in the quote unquote affordable housing in those areas that would cause their own properties to decrease. I guess
Wait, so these people landlords? When you say small businesses, are you talking about like they're landlords of residential?
No, I mean like even like a hair salon or.
Well, if you're got a hair salon and you have more residential people coming in, I mean, presumably there are going to be more people with hair that are going to need their hair done. I don't know. I'm not sure I follow that.
So I guess no, I totally agree. My question would be like, how do you? I guess what would be your approach in like conveying that to them without making it feel like they're gonna, they don't want to. No one wants to not have their income or not have the things that they need, right?
But don't they think that? I just don't understand. They think that more residential, more housing is going to inhibit
more affordable housing that decreases property value that could eventually theoretically trickle down and make their property value decrease.
I just don't.
And if those people aren't spending money at their stores or whatever else, they don't.
I don't understand the connection between decreased rents, let's say, or decreased housing costs and decreased values for commercial properties. I mean, the more people who are living there, I would imagine the commercial properties become more valuable. The more commercial properties you take off the market, the ones that remain, I would imagine, become more valuable, because there's two things that are happening. There's less supply of commercial property and there's more supply of customers.
That's the kind of the clarification I was hoping, because I was trying to convey like the point that you're making, but I was obviously, as I'm not doing a good job of trying to.
Yeah, the tension you're talking about exists more with homeowners, I think, with like single family homes.
But I don't see how that operates. I mean, if you're talking about like, 1,000 new residential apartments coming on that are, I mean, I don't know that. Frankly, I don't think there's a one-to-one relationship in terms of decreasing the value just because there's more supply of affordable housing down there, that it necessarily decreases the value, particularly when you're talking about replacing empty businesses, because you don't want to live in a neighborhood where there's empty storefronts or empty apartments, frankly. It's just...
I know, I agree 100%.
I think, more density is more helpful. I mean, to be honest, like I don't know the specific dynamics of the San Francisco real estate market.
They talk about how it's like, at least what the mayor said, that there's like plans to, decrease the charges, like, because there's so many zoning regulations and different costs that are affiliated with building or doing things within San Francisco, because of, I'm not entirely, familiar with all the regulations and stuff like that. But I mean, if you weren't going to have affordable housing in your building or et cetera, you have to pay $200 per square foot to, build out that place. And then the mayor was talking about how in order to incentivize, people to be developing things, they're like, let's, decrease the amount of affordable housing that you actually have to have within your building to incentivize them to build. My thought process would be, even so, wouldn't that cost be passed down to the people who would be living in those buildings? And if that cost is passed down anyway, then how would that, I don't know how to.
I mean, I think if you're talking about housing for like the unhoused, and people think like this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, and so they think that this is going to lead to like a less desirable neighborhood, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that the way these people are going to become sort of like customers is they're going to have housing first. It really just sounds a little bit just like there's a bigotry and a misunderstanding of like who these people are.
It's a cut off your nose to spite your face. But I mean, reading Mike Davis's City of Courts about the homeowners association control of Los Angeles, for instance, and the difficulty of developing things that aren't like single family homes in certain communities. That is, yeah, I don't know. Because I mean, from a certain perspective, like I remember hearing a developer we talked to for two dope boys that said like the first thing you do, and he told us this expecting us to be sympathetic to him, was you buy property and then you put security guard on all the corners and just basically arrest people until that neighborhood becomes safe. Like that's a way that those people look at developing neighborhoods compared to like making affordable housing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way to I guess the way to discuss it with people is just like, more housing begets more economic activity. And
I mean, the produce store isn't going to want low-income housing for unhoused people on their block.
But they're not a small business.
But yeah, tell them to get bent.
Right, exactly. So those, theoretically speaking, those unhoused people, they're able to move in, they can afford the rent, and those aren't like the affordable housing, like how we have like regulated affordable housing in the city, right? Like that's like the point that the mayor is making, because she's saying that it takes a long time to get even into the affordable housing lottery, and then if we can lower those costs, like I guess my thought process is like, how do you incentivize businesses to also support that without also having the negative effects of like, the same type of people moving in who can afford to have higher rent, but then they're just getting like the nice part of having less. Like
I think they're just afraid that the presence of these people are going to somehow like make the neighborhood less desirable. And I think the idea is that it doesn't contemplate the idea of like what happens when you give people who are unhoused housing. Generally, what happens is, I mean, either in certain instances, with unhoused people, you have drug addiction issues or mental health issues. But when they get housed, they have the opportunity to deal with those issues. And for a lot of people, they just become more productive members of society. So,
I agree. I really appreciate that. I get, it's hard to like argue, I guess, with a lot of the small business owners. They tend to be more right leaning, and they'll start, spewing like talking points. And although like, obviously I'm not well informed, I want to have an informed argument in the way that you do and kind of convey it.
They're not going to be partners in this, I don't think. Like, I think we need to go over their heads when it comes to a lot of these policies. I don't think you're going to be able to persuade small business owners to, support a lot of left policies.
Yeah. Appreciate the call. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
It's hard to know specifically.
Like there are splits. Like with the Goldwater election, I remember this LBJ call where he's talking to some Florida congressperson saying like, if Goldwater gets into president, none of my grocery store customers will have money to spend in my grocery store. And so, I mean, if there is any way to appeal, it's small business owners that would actually benefit from a greater population as opposed to just, rich yuppies coming down and spending a bunch on luxury products.
The audio has been released from the accuser of Matt Schlapp, you'll recall the story that Matt Schlapp, the head of the CPAC, the Conservative Union, is that what it's called? That put on
The American
CPAC,
Conservative
the
Union,
American
yeah.
Conservative Union. Matt Schlapp, in many ways, a disgusting person, regardless of any of these stories. Most famously, told his good buddy, former good buddy, Michael Steele, the only reason why you got elected to the chair of the RNC was because you were black and we were trying to make it look like we cared about black people. That's a paraphrase, but not too much of a paraphrase.
Now,
Pretty
if a
close.
liberal said that about Republicans, it would be a shocking, offensive statement.
Yes. But here is audio of the guy who is recounting what Schlapp had just done to him. I mean, this was recorded, if I'm not mistaken, like within like two and a half hours of this guy drove Matt Schlapp back from a bar. He was working for the Herschel Walker campaign. His job was to cart Matt Schlapp around, who was there to oversee the conservatism, I guess, of Herschel Walker. And he's driving him home from the bar to his hotel. And Schlapp, as far as I can tell, was essentially grabbing his penis while the guy was driving. And he didn't know what to do. And when he dropped off Schlapp, he went home to his wife and recorded both video and I think this probably there's a video to this, but I think they're just releasing the audio portion of it so that he had a contemporaneous record. And then he told people about it contemporaneously. The next morning, and then later, Schlapp calls him after he drops him off, says, "You're still going to pick me up tomorrow, right?" Because Schlapp was probably worried, like, I got to take the temperature of this guy and get a sense of, like, am I in trouble or not? And the staffer the next day, early in the morning, called his boss and said, "I can't drive that guy. He was groping me last night." And so they took him off the Matt Schlapp detail. Here's the audio.
Regards to Matthew Schlapp, chairman of CPAC, who approximately 2 hours ago put his hands on me in a sustained and unsolicited and unwanted manner. It started around 10:45 at Manuel's Tavern in Atlanta. And he was leaning in close to me to a point where I felt uncomfortable. My fault is that I'm sitting here thinking that this is the man drinking, that he's just feeling himself. And at that point that, okay, he's drinking, it's okay.
That was the former Herschel Walker staffer. Matt Schlapp, of course, outraged, looking at legal recourse. The problem might be that there is no legal recourse when someone has spoken the truth.
Yeah. Milo, who has some association with Schlapp, defended Milo back when he made those comments about 13-year-olds. Milo said, "Matt Schlapp tried to touch me too at his offices in 2016-17 when we were negotiating my headliner spot at CPAC. I recoiled, made a joke about him being the wrong skin color, and added that if he tried it again, I would slap him and go public. Maybe that had something to do with him colluding to wreck my career. I don't know, but that's Milo weighing in on the topic."
Oh, did Schlapp go after Milo later?
Well, Milo's alleging that Schlapp was, even though he was defending him and bringing him to CPAC, I guess.
Milo is not the first person I would go to corroborate anything,
right.
but
it's just a little bit of flavor.
Yeah. Stephen Miller on the IM says Matt Schlapp is at least 1% gay. Believe me, I know.
What was the original context of that? Trump knew somebody was.
Stephen Miller said that Donald Trump was not even 1% gay.
No, Trump said Stephen Miller was.
Oh, not even 1%
Trump
gay. Yeah,
said
that's
Miller
it.
is not even 1%.
And why was that a question?
Because he was getting a lot of ladies around the. Who knows why he brought it up? But look, this Matt Schlapp thing, it's a little bit of a throwback for people. But back in the day, around the time when we were writing FUBAR, like we had a full chapter on anti-gay conservatives. They turn their self-hatred outward. Now, I don't think Schlapp, relatively speaking, was particularly anti-gay in the context of CPAC. Like he would allow the log cabin Republicans there, and but it is pretty just classic. It is pretty classic. Let's do this one clip, number 3. This is House Representative Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina. It's going to be hard to imagine that a lot of these cracks in the Republican caucus are going to get repaired. And it very well may be that some of the reforms, and look, I think it is a good thing to devolve power from the leadership to the members. And some of these holdouts are going to get committee chairs. But there are some that are going to get chewed up and they're going to get destroyed. And it's unclear yet who those are going to be. But you get the sense I'm hearing from some of these Republicans in the caucus that they're going to just wait. And when there's an opportunity for them to break those members who made them go through that, they're going to break them.
The speaker has reportedly given the Freedom Caucus, that ultra-conservative faction, a third of the seats on the Powerful Rules Committee, which controls which bills make it to the floor. You've called Matt Gaetz, one of its members, a political D-lister and a fraud. You've sparred with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll show our viewers part of that and let them interpret your meaning. How are you going to work with these folks to get anything done for the American people?
It's going to be very difficult. Matt Gaetz is a fraud. Every time he voted against Kevin McCarthy last week, he sent out a fundraising email. What you saw last week was a constitutional process diminished by those kinds of political actions. I don't support that kind of behavior. I am very concerned as someone who represents a lot of centrists, a lot of independents. I have as many independents and Democrats as I have Republicans in my district. I have to represent everybody. I am concerned that common sense legislation will not get through to get a vote on the floor. And for example, we have 12 bills that we're supposedly going to be voting on in our first week in office. 3 of them are abortion bills and pro-life bills. I am pro-life, but I have many exceptions, but they are not pieces of legislation that can pass the Senate and get onto the desk for the president to sign into law. And so if we're going to be serious about protecting life, for example, maybe we should look at more centrist views like ensuring every woman has access to birth control. Because if you can reduce pregnancies, you can reduce the need or want for women to have abortions. For example, a very common sense, pragmatic point of view. But that's not what we're going to be voting on this week. And I am concerned. I want to see pragmatics at work, common sense, fiscal conservative issues at work that represent all views.
I mean, she is I think an outlier on some level, but I think the point is that the caucus is going to line up and have the same, not necessarily the same politics as her. I mean, she sounds like, someone who is at least somewhat disciplined by the fact that not coming from an entirely Republican district. But there's going to be people who are going to be upset.
And it just seems like, especially if this is Nancy Mace is no real so-called moderate Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. And even she's basically kind of, I think, telegraphing here, I am going to be the one taking arrows for this stuff back home, and basically with no choice as to whether or not to vote for it, because as a staunch McCarthy ally also, I can't be in the position of both kind of mavericking some of these votes while also sort of not going along with him as well.
This is something you revisit now in 2 years, is basically what she's saying. Like, this is going to make it almost impossible for someone like her, quite impossible, but to get reelected is what she's worried about. Because the entire project, which I think and on some level was already like, here's the surprise. They already have a problem with extremism. The reason why they picked up the House is because Democrats don't mobilize. The Democratic Party in New York State is garbage. There was no fear amongst Democrats in places like New York and California that there was going to be statutes, laws passed that will inhibit a woman's right to abortion in those states. And so they didn't feel like they needed to come out for these sort of more localized elections, or as they perceived it. And it ain't going to get better for them in 2024, both in terms of like the motivation of Democrats to come out and vote, and in terms of their ability to sell themselves as not complete nut jobs, because they're going to start voting on things, or they're going to basically be inhibited from passing any type of legislation. Not that it would have necessarily been signed or passed in the Senate, but they're just not going to be able to run on anything other than their sheer insanity. One more caller. Calling from a 918 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. Had to get off Bluetooth real quick. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
I had this whole thing. I was wanting to really dive into the topic of the infrastructure bill and some of the things you could help me break down on that. But I did want to bring up real quick because you also like to debate quite a bit. I've been doing this like weekly, Friday nights, Thursday nights, every now and again on TikTok. And I was going to suggest, and I tried reaching out to suggest that maybe you try that just for fun. It only takes 1,000 followers to go live. It's super easy. And while people are scrolling through TikTok, they will come across like lives and debates. And I've already had pretty decent success. And I basically just talk about, hot button issues, whether it's politics, religion, basically using like critical thinking and skepticism and, science to
are you debating
break through to the right wing.
Are you debating other people on or what do you?
Yes, yeah. So typically when you get on there, TikTok I call it like a number surge. It'll throw it out there and really hit a lot of people's screens, and they can choose to stay or go. But because I put those hot button issues out there on my background, people kind of tend to stick around and see what's this guy got to say about it, because it basically says, I'm an atheist, socialist, veteran, so-and-so, just to kind of get people to stick around. But yeah, so typically you'll get people in chat that'll ask you questions, they'll troll, and you kind of pick and choose what you want to answer, how you want to answer. But it gets fun when you get the people that do have 1,000 followers or more. They can request to jump in. So they can appear on your screen, they can appear on camera or off camera, but they will talk to you, and you can have that back and forth debate. And I've had really good results. I've actually had quite a few right-leaning people say, hey, you give me some stuff to think about, and you've made some interesting suggestions. And I found it not only rewarding for the fact that I like to get these ideas out there and share this stuff, but I call it like bubble bursting, because this is TikTok. There's no real right or left-leaning affiliation on TikTok. So you're reaching out to people that typically might not see this kind of information and have no idea, other than what their propaganda and what their bubble's telling them an atheist or a socialist would believe, and why. So I've found it really rewarding so far.
Send an email with your TikTok handle. I'll go check out what you're doing, and then maybe I'll jump on and do that.
That's awesome. Would you mind if I plug my TikTok handle while I'm on here?
No, please.
Oh, okay. It's at Indrid, INDRID, .cold27, at Indrid Cold27. And I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, sir.
Get on TikTok. All right. That concludes the phone call portion of our program. Let's get some IMs. Pharmacology Boy if you just put a probiotic to reach the colon, you just put it in the synthetic equivalent of a corn kernel. There you go. Thumb up link. Happy Fun Day Monday, folks. Lula condemned the coup attempt, almost immediately took decisive action to ensure those responsible are held accountable. Where's the painfully corny show team? Doesn't Lula care about the esteemed halls of government compromising with people who actively despise him and everything he stands for? When does the right-wing politician with a pro-Bolsonaro voting record get their reputation rehabilitated because they said fascist coup attempts are bad? Also, how long before Bolsonaro ends up on I'm a Celebrity? Get me out of here. Camera guy, should the Dems be working on frustrated moderate Republicans? Maybe get them to join for a few votes? Also, with the ability to have just one person call a vote on a speaker, Dems should be able to effectively halt anything the Republicans try and do. I think you need to be a part of the majority to do that. And I also don't think you're going to see too much in terms of Republican defectors. I think you would have seen it the other way, maybe. But it's just working with Democrats is just a death knell for a Republican. There's just no way for them to sort of thread that needle. Matt of Philadelphia about calling legislators about New York Chief Justice nominee. If you recall, you won't. I called a while back about the calling club idea. Would Majority Report lead a campaign to make one call a month to legislators on key issues? At the time, you mentioned Kyle was working on something that could enable something like that. Is that still in the works? Just sent an email with a link of a video of my reference call, warning it has a disturbing intro of you flapping like a butterfly while Mark Maron describes you as sane. I'm not sure I quite get that second part, but we should look back into that. I don't know what Kyle is working on, but I'll look at that. The artist, Sam, since you control the squad, can you get me the $600 Biden still owes me? L. Conniption. Yo, Sam, Cory just said your favorite word. Every time I hear it, I think back to that time in your show when the Libertarian you were debating asked you to spell monopsony, and you told him MONOSOPY. Sorry. Sam, tight pants. A Supreme Court case being argued tomorrow. Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters Local 174, if all goes expected, would allow companies to sue workers whose strike actions lead to tortious destruction of the company's property. Think of suing Starbucks barista for the spoiled milk at a striking Starbucks location. Terribly bad if this is how the Supreme Court wants. Power here is granted to the National Labor Relations Board. This should not even be before the court, hence why the Washington State Supreme Court tossed it on those grounds last year. Ugh. Ooh, I think I talked to somebody on the Nation cruise who was involved in that. Will you remind me of that? Send me a link to that. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Fun story I heard from another musician. A famous artist, instead of paying radio stations to play his music, has begun paying radio stations to not play the music of new artists to stop any emerging competition. Reminds me of the Hunter S. Thompson quote, "The music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free. Good men die like dogs." There's also a negative side. Jay Pipinina, great commentary from Cory. This is why Dave Eggers is so on point. It's critiques of Amazon. What's the remedy? Brain Party, just following up to a message I sent a few months ago. How is it that NATO ascension going for Finland and Sweden? How is that NATO ascension? I'm not sure. We'll check. Great interview today. The book Knowledge Economy by Roberto Unger actually covers these issues at an economy-wide level. Ostentatious Artifact is an excellent documentary cataloging the hell and piles of cash 30 Seconds to Mars went through to break their contract with Virgin EMI, set against the collapse. They, too, were being compensated pennies on the dollar. Ryan and Callie. Shockley was still taken seriously in the psychology at all when I was studying in the 80s. It would be I would become furious when libertarian professors would both sides as eugenics. My guess is Larry Summers is on Epstein's Island. Henry! Hey, Sam, I remember reading Little Brother X as a kid, so it was fun to see Doctorow coming on the show. Did anyone win the office pool on McCarthy winning after 15 attempted votes for Speaker? I don't think anybody would have gotten that far. Militant Apathy, great guest today. Maybe tell your boy Robert Kraft to get the Pats QB who's in a dirty player. Bobert and MTG are still going at it. Aaron is not cool. Sam, great interview. I'm directing a film and we're at the financing stage, and I've been wondering about a pay structure that would be as revolutionary as possible and making sure payout would be the fairest to everyone. Well, I mean, you could theoretically, I mean, I think you probably have union constraints in terms of the actors, but you could but you don't, that's just a minimum, not a maximum. you could have everyone sort of like get paid a certain percentage of the sales. Everybody has a participation. Sean from Maryland, the thing about force the vote is you actually cared about passing universal health care. As you all say, fight for progressive Democrats in primaries instead of trying to divide the progressive left and start meaningless arguments, fights online. Of course. Of course. Skippy. Bolsonaro is in a Florida hospital, hiding from prosecution or just permanently messed up guts. Minnesota guy. Would the proposed reform to non-compete agreements be retroactive? I asked because the small company I work for was bought up by a large company recently. I had to sign one to keep my job. It would be nice if it just went away. That's a good question. We're going to have somebody on a week. This Wednesday. Oh, this coming Wednesday. Okay, so we're going to have somebody on. Oh, this Wednesday? Oh, in 2 days. And we'll ask that question. Will you just remind me? Retroactive. Yeah. Hunter Swag. Jair Bolsonaro was apparently just hospitalized in Orlando with abdominal pain, according to the Globe.
I tweeted like basically a year ago that if he moves to the U.S. as planned, that he's going to be bankrupt from U.S. medical bills before 6 months.
That's fantastic. Sam from Ottawa, the Canadian government just announced a return to work mandate for all departments. They've cited one reason for the mandate being downtown businesses here in Ottawa suffering from a lack of daily foot traffic, but they ignore the fact that converting those offices cited a few bogus reasons. Ottawa is also facing a housing crisis. Adams basically did that. He was making that argument. Gageson, Fox News reporting Bolsonaro hospitalized with abdominal pain. Barnacle Boy, I'm pretty sure I've heard Sam say the word penis more times in the last 2 weeks than I've heard it in all of 2022. Well, it's going to be 2023 is the year of the penis because we're going to hear about it with Hunter Biden constantly, although 2024 could also too be. To add to Kowalski's AG report, diesel fuel additive DEFLU is required in all diesel engines built today. DEF is fertilizer as a urea-based substance, and manufacturers of DEF can swap out tooling and manufacturing fertilizer for use on Kowalski's farm. Dalaban. Sam, can you clip that FTV part for YouTube? Pretty good explanation with the exception that the comparable ask was probably the term limit vote, which will go nowhere. Jimmy Dore. Debate me, coward. Of course. And Jimmy has an open door invite on this program. And I'd happily go on his program. Top G. Santos. Dear Majority Reporters, have you ever read about quantum physics or string theory? If you did, you'd know that everything is true in one reality or another. Even if my mom didn't die in the Holocaust on 9/11, in this reality, she did in another. Recognize that everything is always and equally true. God is an astronaut. Oz is over the rainbow, and Midian is where the monsters live. Peace.
It's helpful.
Okay. All right, two more. Josh from Tucson. Do we need to go back to the foot tapping in the airport bathroom stall? Indeed. You remember that guy, Larry Craig? And the final IM of the day. Jonathan Armstead, between this interview, the one on austerity, and the one on the data cartels, you've started the year with 3 best of candidates for 2023. Kudos. Bradley, Matt, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice is made for the option where you don't get paid.